I'm Mike Govoni, and for the last 15 years, I've been in recovery from addiction and on the deepest quest to find healing, to experience my own unique wholeness beyond the story of what happened to me. By taking an integrative, holistic approach to experience transformation, I bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, a show dedicated to people in recovery who are looking for deeper healing and transformation. And for today's guest, Meagan Kenney is the creator and host of the Addictionary Podcast on YouTube and is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in clinical psychology at William James College in Newton, Mass. She founded the school's Opioid Crisis and Advocacy student group and is passionate to raise awareness about the many pathways towards recovery, which is informed by her personal struggles with opioid addiction. Meagan has worked in the mental health field for over 7 years and has her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. She is currently conducting research examining how individuals use cannabis as an exit strategy from opioid use and addiction, which will be concluded in September. Meagan is motivated to use her public platform to encourage people to think outside the box, especially when it comes to their own health care, and emphasizes the need for systems, health, and integration. She has been a public voice in the realm of addiction, recovery, trauma, and plant medicines, and has been featured in the U.S. News and World Report, MassINC, iHeartRadio, WBZ, Metro, and more. So Meg Kenney, welcome to the show, and I'm so excited to have you. And one of the main reasons why I'm really excited to have you is so that my accent doesn't sound so funny, because I think your accent is a little bit more Bostonian than mine. So
I think you might be right about that, Mike. I appreciate that. And in fact, yes, my Boston accent is quite thick, and it becomes even thicker when I'm around somebody else that has it and at least has the flavor. So chances are this conversation might start out not hearing it, and then people are really going to hear it once I get going.
Awesome. So warning to the listeners, if you don't hear an R in our words, don't worry about it. It's just, we just forget to leave that letter out. So
Mike, we got too many other important things to say. We can't be worrying about R's. You know what I mean?
Yeah, seriously. You got to park your car over there and put your butter on your toast. It's all good. All right.
I love it.
Let's roll right in and give the audience a little description about who you are and what you do, and a little bit about you.
Heck yeah. I love it. All right. So my name is Meagan Kenney from Boston. Proud of it and still here. And I know, right? Shout out to the bean. And so yeah, how many hats do I hold these days? Let's see. All right. So I am the creator and host of the Addictionary Podcast, which I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about how that came to be. Also in school right now in a clinical psychology doctoral program at a graduate school here right outside of Boston.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. I am approaching the finish line, if we want to call it that, but it's been an arduous process. So I'll be happy to get this over with and actually apply this stuff. So, and then I spend most of my time outside of that really. Well, I do work for private health as well. So I do case management and sober companionship for folks typically in need of support when they're transitioning in and out of programs. And then I've trained at some hospitals. I've done some, mental health and psychiatric work and at a hospital setting, which I also enjoy. I'll be doing that again in September as part of my internship. And then, I really try to use my platforms to encourage people to start thinking outside the box when it comes to their own health care, when it comes to mental health, addiction treatment, and the like, especially with regards to spirituality and meditation, which is sort of where my life is headed now. So I've spoken on a lot of public platforms and written blogs and have given speeches, but I use those opportunities to try to take what I'm doing with folks on a small individual basis, sort of to the larger collective. And so that's really how I spend a lot of my time these days.
Awesome. Sounds like you're in the territory. Sounds like you're in the trenches getting it done.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny you say that, because I had this conversation with somebody just yesterday about sort of where I'm headed with my career, and they brought up that same point about how valuable it is, no matter what we sort of end up doing when it comes to these subjects, whether it is individual clinical work or not, we need to keep our feet on the ground, and we need to keep in the trenches to find out what is really going on. Because in my perspective, that is where the real research helps shift things. Not so much in the lab, but more so sort of on the street and what people are actually struggling with in real time.
Yeah, totally. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the person, and helping them in making the best strides in supporting the person to overcome addiction or to experience healing or whatever it may be. And, as we both know, there's a lot of filler work sort of in the process of all that. And I think, why you and I kind of, enjoy each other's company so much is we're really trying to get to the meat and potatoes of what's up with the person and how do we make the biggest difference at that level. So that's exciting. And before we even kind of get there, I want to just share a little bit about your podcast. And I think from a previous conversation we had, it was rated the number one top podcast, recovery podcast this year. Is that true?
We ranked number 2 by ADT Health out of, I think, 30 something podcasts for 2020, I believe, which was major. And Podbean also recognized us last year as one of the top 10 mental health podcasts out there. So, I mean, this is like, I started this thinking maybe I'd change a couple people's minds or at least get a couple people maybe thinking differently. And little did I know that we would actually get recognized by people that we are impressed by. So it's pretty humbling. Yeah. It's pretty wild. And it's such a testament to the work that you're also doing with your podcast now of how valuable these platforms are to people because they don't have to go out and seek it. We can come to them and come inside their homes. And that's powerful.
Yeah, that is. And especially in the middle of a pandemic, we're not, congregating so much like we used to. So when we can bring this to their headphones or to their computer in their house, it's really, really valuable. And yeah, I've been fortunate enough to be a guest on your podcast and you're doing, amazing things. So congrats on the number 2 rating. That's quite an accomplishment. And, what's led you to that success, Meg? How have you gotten there?
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. And I just want to say your story was incredible on my show. We actually did a 2-part episode. And it's real. I have to say, I think to use your phrase, the meat and potatoes of sort of where that platform took me to get recognition like this started with the quality guests that we've had on our show that really tell a story by bringing people in. And when you get to walk that line with somebody and you get to actually see based on their storytelling capacity, you get to see the world that they've seen from their eyes. And so many of us that do this work and so many of us that have struggled with addiction are really, really true empaths at the core. We have the capacity to sort of step inside someone's shoes and try to see out the way that through their eyes, the way that they see the world. And so I just want to congratulate you as well on starting your own podcast and realizing that your story has that much of an impact and it's worthy to people. So props to you. So I know it's like a love fest right now, but really like me and Mike have known each other for a little bit and I really, really appreciate the work that you do as well. So, what led me here was really my inability to shut up as a Bostonian. I just had too much to say and sort of nowhere to say it. And I think it's really been fascinating over the course of this journey. We're going to be in January. We'll be coming up on 3 years with this podcast about how the theme that has resonated with me from the beginning, which was the message, was to share your truth, whatever it was, whatever it is, whatever it will be, whatever it may transform into. And so I think it's just been powerful. That really was the launching point, was that I had so much to say. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to bridge this newfound clinical expertise with this sordid, dark, shameful past of being this quote unquote drug addict. Now I'm in school to be a therapist, and I didn't know how to bridge those two worlds. And we can talk a little bit about the person that maybe influenced me to start a podcast, who played a major role in my life in many ways. But the premise of it was that I was so sick and tired of seeing people get stuck, whether that be because they were funneled into a treatment system that just didn't fit them, or they had tried and was following the direction of people who they trusted, and everyone had good intentions of telling people how to get sober. And so many people just that I knew were dying and not having any success where they felt like they were living a fulfilling life. And so I said, something's got to change here. And my recovery has been non-traditional, and there has got to be more people out here that have the same story. And I'm really sick and tired of the dominating voice and perception out here silencing people like me. There's got to be more of me. I'm not unique. And we're those people. And they deserve a platform, and they deserve a voice too, because when they don't get their voice heard too, they die. And if I didn't get my voice heard, my death would have been my option too. And so as challenging as it was to come forward with my whole story, I knew that there was no other option. And the podcast has been the platform that has helped me do that.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. That is really beautiful. And I love when you say, share your truths. Like that's so empowering. That's so empowering. So to back up a little bit, I think, people who may be listening have this idea, okay, here's Mike and Meg, they have their own podcast, how they get this far, that sort of thing. And we're just like anyone else. We suffered, I had a $500 a day opiate habit. I know at the end of your drug using, you were an IV drug user. Is that correct?
Yep. I turned to IV. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, to let people know, like, we're real people that have been through the ringer. But like Carl Jung says, it's not what happened to you. It's what you choose to become. So you and I are over here speaking our truth. And when you speak your truth, it gives another person permission to speak theirs. So to get into maybe the nuts and bolts of your story a little bit, so people can see that side of you that maybe they're still identifying with, but haven't quite transitioned to, their purpose and podcast host and all that, but they aspire to. Can we kind of, go back and then bridge those two, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So hopefully I understand your question correctly, but I think what you're asking is sort of how did I sort of find that truth and then channel that into the podcast, right? Like, how do you find that passion and then bring that truth to light?
Yeah.
I think for me, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of delay. We'll just cut that out. That's okay.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. So, yeah, why don't you just go, and then I'll clip it back to the last piece I said.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's kind of funny that you asked that question, because in preparation for our talk today, I was sort of writing some notes down. And one of the big turning points for me to be able to find that truth and then match my actions to my truth was to really, and this was through the work that I've done with my therapist, who's been my meditation teacher over the last 3 years. And she's taught me the basics of heart-centering meditation. And then once I got the basics, we've sort of leveled up, if you will. We just kind of like keep going to the next dimension of like how far we can go to really get clear about your truth, which is really a never-ending process if you look at it from a consciousness perspective. So I think really for me, you want to know what it was like, I held this big personality. I held these strong opinions. I have this sort of delivery that is mixed in with my personality. So like I use humor on the show, and I kind of have big energy. And for so long, I couldn't embrace that. That was a shameful part of who I was. And I didn't like that part of myself, because when I'm really myself, I know that a lot of people actually don't like it, or that a lot of people do like it, but a lot of people don't like it. So it's like that wound in me where I feel like I have to please everybody, or I have to have everybody like me. It's painful to recognize that people don't like what you have to say, or don't value you in some way, in the same way that maybe you see the value in yourself. But the only way that you can get clear about, people that you can connect to and where your power actually lies is to speak your truth. And so much of my meditation work has been stepping into my power and accepting that and recognizing the energy and the power that I hold and embracing that from a non-ego standpoint, but using it to actually deepen my compassion and deepen my spirituality and deepen my meditation practice to be able to actually do what it is that I was put here on earth to do, which I think is use my pain and suffering, let people borrow my hope until they can build their own in a way that helps them see beyond themselves. So it's like that ultimate psychedelic thought of like seeing the same thing from so many different perspectives that now you get to take all of that information in and make a completely informed decision about how your life is going to go and how you're going to live your truth. And there was a lot of fear behind why I wasn't living my truth and speaking my mind and sharing my full self with the world because of all of these things that I had been ashamed of, and the addiction being a big part of that. So that's how I was able to move forward with this whole coming out about my story of recovery, which was also a very challenging thing that had to happen first before this podcast.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is that you haven't done it alone, which I think is a huge thing to let people know in the recovery communities. We can't get to this next level without support. And from your therapist and different modalities, you're able to kind of just keep going and going and going because you're in the process of doing your deeper work, which is beautiful. And I hear your energy, I hear your power, and that's really beautiful, Meg. And I imagine at some point in your life, maybe that power was too much, you thought, for others, but it's really beautiful. And yeah. And I've watched you kind of just excel in the last couple of years. And it's amazing. So to our listeners, right, who maybe are in recovery looking to up level like that, you can't do it alone. And you said a huge thing is I got help. I have a therapist. I'm meditating. And I know you're into, taking alternative approaches and things of that nature. What else have you done in your path to recovery that's allowed you to continue to up level and find the success that you've found? So what else are you into?
Yeah, so it seems like every time I always have a goal for myself. There's always something that's causing me distress about how I engage the world. And we can call it trauma. We can call it trauma of past lifetimes. We can call it attachment-related stuff. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why we have trouble doing the things that we want to do in this world. And for me, a lot of times my anxiety will get in the way, create a fixation, if you will, where I ruminate about things. I sort of future trip, so I'll create things to worry about. And I've had sort of an epiphany recently about how that actually is replacing the drugs that used to exist well over 8 years ago now. And how I actually ground myself without knowing it, totally unconsciously, ground myself in my fear and my anxiety. And so it's these opportunities that I take to always set a goal and seek a way to find relief from it outside of the drugs. And so every time I find relief where I'm like, okay, wow, like that was a door that just opened for me. And I feel like now I have the insight, I have the awareness, I have the education, and I have the motivation to sort of like damper that, like put the flame out on the anxiety. Okay, so now we move to something else, some other challenge in my life, some other part of myself that I sort of want to work on or heal. And so, the work never ends for me, I feel like, but it doesn't feel daunting because I know that through my avenues of seeking, first it was Vivitrol that I was on for 3.5 years that helped me get clean and sober. And then I come off the Vivitrol, and for a variety of different reasons, cannabis comes into play. And that was to get me off of the pharmaceuticals that I had been on at that point, which I was having horrible side effects to. So the antidepressants and the beta blockers to manage the anxiety that was now at an all-time high, coming off of the Vivitrol and now being into recovery 3.5 years. And so then I explore cannabis. I start doing my research on cannabis as a replacement for opioids. I'm looking at the research of Yasmin Hurd at the Icahn School of Medicine in New York. I'm looking at all of this data about how the cannabis is extinguishing the opioid cravings and the role that CBD is playing in all of that. And then I start this podcast where now I'm using my platform to delve into some stuff that I haven't delved into before. So we have the Canna Chronicles series, which I created because I wanted to start conducting my own research by talking with people who had successfully replaced opioids with cannabis, and why did it work for them? What about this plant did the trick that no other medication and no other meeting and no other avenue could do for you? And through that, I started exploring additional plant medicines like psilocybin, like ayahuasca, and all of the other plant medicines like ibogaine. And so, and that's how microdosing has recently started to play a role in my life with the psilocybin as a way to start looking at some of these, I guess, symptoms, if we want to actually use that word, that pop up. For me, it used to be anxiety. Anxiety is still there, but not at the forefront. And so depression sometimes will pop in. And that's when those are the sort of feelings that really kind of throw me off track, because I think when we get stuck in those feelings of hopelessness and with depression, your perspective starts to get constricted. That's problematic because now our world becomes restricted. Our mind constructs our world. And so that's how I started exploring the microdosing. And so it's just been a journey of every time I hit a plateau or I feel like I've sort of accomplished the thing I set out to accomplish. Well, now it's time for something else to explore.
Wow. So there's so much to unpack there. And I think you're little, would you say Cannabis Chronicles?
Canna Chronicles, yeah, on the Addictionary.
Canna Chronicles, awesome. This whole idea of psychedelics playing an integral part of the lives of people in recovery is rather interesting and I think quite progressive. And I don't know if everyone's psyche is quite ready to hear this type of information, but I know you do a lot of research. I do a lot of research, and the research is really showing from MAPS programs and what they have going on with MDMA, with psilocybin, ayahuasca from the Ayahuasca Foundation. These plant medicines are helping people shift their consciousness, which I think is so very needed amongst the people in the recovery community. Now, you talked about meditation and spirituality being, part of your life. What does it look like for you in a day-to-day, world as far as your practice and, microdosing or whatever? What does that look like for you day-to-day?
Good question. So when cannabis sort of entered the picture for me when I came off of the Vivitrol, it was during a time in which I was probably most vulnerable in my recovery, where I was in a relationship that was toxic and abusive for a variety of different ways. But this person was an active user and was the person that introduced me to IV drug use. And so hence the reason why I stay on Vivitrol for 3.5 years, because I knew I wasn't safe off of it. But there was a turning point where I was like, okay, I can't live my life, depending on a medication to save me from some sort of outside factor. Like, this work has to be done internally. And that's where cannabis comes in. Now, cannabis at that point I started consuming the day it became legal in Massachusetts. So I've had my medical marijuana card since then. And I've intermittently used it primarily for sleep at night, so small amounts. And then I've given it up to sort of attempt to deepen my meditation practice, which I think is valuable. And I'm sort of back in that place again, where now I've given it up, and the goal is to go deeper into the meditation without using anything at all in order to get there. So if we want to just include how the meditation works sort of on a day-to-day for me, yes, I do set time aside weekly to do sessions with myself where I sit for 20 to 40 minutes with some sort of chanting music or whatever, and I pick an image of whatever the fear is that is at the bottom of whatever the distressing thing was that happened over that last week. However, I will say I deepen that practice on a minute by minute, hour to hour basis throughout the day, where when I am feeling unsteady, ungrounded, anxious, nervous, fearful, I'm recognizing the physiological symptoms where I know that all of that is happening when my heart starts to race. I use what I call dropping into the heart center, which is the heart centering meditation practice that I utilize to be able to visually, in my own mind, in my mind's eye, visualize my energy dropping sort of from my throat, where it's usually locked in my throat chakra of fear expressing myself in whatever capacity. That's usually driving it. And then I sort of envision how that energy drops into my heart. But not only that, I then envision how I can share that. It's like so funny to say this, but like, do you remember the Care Bears and like the Care Bear stare, how they would all lock arms and like have love like shoot out of their chest? Like that's sort of the vision. And so you kind of like shoot that love and compassion out, but you're willing to receive it as well. And so I do that throughout the day just to sort of bring it back to a place of compassion, trying to really understand from a feeling standpoint, what that other perspective may be. And that usually helps sort of bring me out of a place in which I'm getting stuck in some anxiety. And so I'll do that throughout the day, all day long. I do it now without even realizing it. I'll do it in session with my therapist and she'll comment on it and tell me that she just watched me do it. So this is like a minute by minute strategy that I'll use that has absolutely changed the game for me without question. I wish more people knew how to do this.
Yeah, it's so meditation is so powerful that when I say, if I had to give you one modality that has helped me transform and heal, it's through meditation. So I want to back up just a hair. When you said you use CBD at night to help you sleep, and then you kind of taper off, and then meditation. So for the listeners, I really want to let you know it's not about taking CBD or cannabis or psychedelic drugs all the time. Like, we're not trying to bypass, but these things can be great, door openers to experience those deeper, profound states or the mystical experiences, or microdosing to help with neurogenesis to, new connectivity in the brain. But one thing you said is through the meditation practice is you're evoking a feeling. So that's so very important, because when you can match the feeling with the intention, right? In the quantum universe, we can create it in our physical world. So when I was suffering, I began to practice in the Buddhist practice metta, love and kindness. And I was really beginning to hold myself in compassion for the first time, with all my pain. And in doing so, I would shed these tears in meditation, and I was really cultivating those those places in my brain for empathy. And I think, when you hold your throat chakra or your tension in your throat with mindfulness, and you evoke and intentionally bring in a state of love for yourself in that moment, and you feel that, then you're healing yourself with your own consciousness.
So true.
And yeah, you're healing. And this is my message to people too, is like, we're all healers, and we're all healers of ourselves. And it sounds like through your practice of meditation, you're actually tending to those parts of yourself, such as that tension in your throat, with your own loving presence, and opening to that, and having that felt sense of, kindness and empathy for your own self. And that's beautiful.
Well, I mean,
and that's
what you're saying, Mike. I mean, that is why the MDMA assisted psychotherapy right now is getting pushed through as breakthrough therapy by the FDA. I mean, there's a reason why that medication, that drug, if you want to call it that, actually has the ability to assist people with PTSD symptoms. It's because of the self-compassion, and it's because of the oxytocin that gets boosted because of that drug, that people are allowed to more seamlessly have self-compassion, which, I mean, like you're saying, I mean, we could essentially pose a theory here that says self-compassion is the ingredient that you must need in order to heal these parts of yourself. And here's the thing, is like, we're saying there's got to be a way to not be afraid to embrace that pain and suffering. We're saying use these tools, cannabis, CBD, psychedelic plant medicines, meditation, anything regarding your spirituality, to not bypass the pain. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I go into the pain and suffering. I evoke that feeling state, like you're saying, and I sit with it long enough until it loses its power. And then I move on, because then I've given myself the compassion to go there with no judgment, and to accept that I do have this fear, and I don't split it off anymore. I take it in. And that's why this integration theory is the platform that I'm sort of shouting from on a regular basis now. It's not about pushing parts of ourselves aside and pretending like they don't exist, or disavowing them or not acknowledging them. It's about bringing it all back into one hub.
All parts are welcomed.
Exactly. That's it.
All parts are welcome. And now for a quick commercial break. Hey guys, maybe you're feeling stuck in your current path to recovery and know you have some work to do, but don't know where to turn. I was there too. Even after being in recovery for almost a decade, I was still riddled with fear, struggled desperately in relationship, found myself continuously trying to escape through external means, and at the end, my body was sick. We didn't get sober to continue to carry around the baggage of our past. We're here to thrive and live the best versions of ourselves. So you don't have to suffer like I did. I want to let you know about my passion and purpose in the form of service, and that's my work as a trauma-informed integrative recovery coach. I offer my services in the form of a one-on-one coaching program called Healing Beyond Recovery, where I take an integrative, holistic approach to help you get to the root cause of what's keeping you stuck so you can thrive in your life in recovery. You can learn more about me and my services on my webpage at www.mikegovoni.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. Once you're on the page, click Apply Now to schedule a complimentary discovery call with me today. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show. Something that I just want to spin off here, you mentioned about, splitting off. And I think in the conventional 12-step world, it's a very much like spiritual bypassing type of way of going about things and just, praying, just pray about it. Or, it's not actually getting into the territory with creating that self-compassion. Although there is an 11-step sought through prayer and meditation. I know from my own personal experience, I didn't begin to meditate until, my ass was to the fire 9 years into recovery. And then I began to finally not split myself off and bypass that pain, but like you said, turn towards it. And in the heart of the pain is the healing.
You just nailed it. I mean, think about it. The shamanic principle, the whole theory of Chiron, the wounded healer, is that the disease is the cure. We walk into it in order to walk through it. That's the ultimate way in which we heal, in my perspective. And that's what I think we need to see more of. And you just hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely.
As my mentor would say, all sickness, right? If you look at sickness, whether it's the disease model of addiction, which I don't see through, but in case you do, right? All sickness is homesickness. All healing is self-healing. A journey home to your true self. And that's what's amazing, is we're all on a journey back home to ourselves. But often it's not turning towards, but turning away. Even, let me just share a little bit, like a 4th step in recovery, right? Where was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and afraid? Well, where was I neglected, abandoned, abused, and betrayed? And it's like we have to begin to turn towards and recognize the trauma and pain we've been through and lived through. And we have to face that and begin to hold that and be with it in order to transform it. So it sounds like you've had wonderful results by integrating, CBD and microdosing and ultimately meditation to come home to yourself and find that healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say the microdosing stuff only started recently. I mean, and when I say microdose, I mean like for people that know what that means, it's a sub-perceptual dose. You literally get no high off of it, but it does allow you to sort of, the way that I would describe the experience is that it allows you to sort of let go of the mind traps that our neural pathways are probably more familiar with. We probably go down these pathways a little bit more frequently than maybe the others. And so our brain goes to those negative places, those, I wouldn't say dark, but that shadow side of ourselves, that place in which we are being self-critical and judgmental of ourselves and others, where we don't have compassion for ourselves and others. That's what I talk about now in studying the astrology that I'm studying now, is I look at it from a frequency energetic standpoint. So when we're in those places, and that is characterized, if we want to use the Western model, depression, anxiety, rumination, and the like, that's low frequency energy. That's not high frequency stuff. So that that narrows our perspective. And you want to know what else narrows our perspective? Being on opioids. So when I'm in that place, it's very similar to the place that I used to be in when I was under the influence of opioids. And that's a mind constricting, energetic restricting, perspective restricting place that my psyche then steps into. And so I have to be mindful of the fact that it is much easier for my brain to go to a negative, complaining, critical, judgmental place, lacking compassion, than it is to actually be in the place that does provide me happiness, which is the opposite of all of that stuff. And so when we get stuck in those patterns and we fulfill those patterns all through our drug use and alcohol use, we have to realize that it's going to take a massive shift in order to get us to the place where we find relief. And the place that we find relief is when we really are our true selves, but life has taught us to go a different direction, whether it's from trauma or the like. And so it does take a lot of work. But when you can actually speak from a place of relief because you have felt it, because everything that you have used to try to incorporate healing into your life has actually worked in some way, and you're willing to see that it's worked, well, then that's when stuff really starts to change. And so the microdosing has been a part of helping me put away that low energy, not worry so much about the mundane stuff, my wounds of trying to please everybody, or my resistance to authority, or whatever shows up in the day-to-day at work and whatever. I get to step out of that and actually take a bird's eye view, that observer point of view, I can't do by myself a lot of the times. Even I can sit in meditation for hours some days and not feel relief. So I'm not saying the microdosing is the end all be all, but the microdosing with the psilocybin for me has allowed me the opportunity to really step out of that path and jump into the next track, if you will.
Yeah, the next track, I assume, is a different neural pathway with a different result. And it's like you said, it is difficult, right? This work you're talking about of transforming into seeing with new eyes and seeing, through a new lens is a process. So for people listening out there, it doesn't happen overnight, but it's the path is the goal. And instead of, trying to come to an end and say, I got it. It's through the process, right? Healing happens in the present moment. Healing happens when you begin to shift and see with new eyes. And, what you're explaining is really beautiful. And it's really the process and being willing to seek, right? Like you're a seeker, as am I. And to really say, okay, like I'm going to open up my mind beyond, what I've been told, or beyond maybe what worked for me in the past, and say, hey, I need to try something new. And to just kind of piggyback what you said about MDMA is, I had a client come back from MDMA therapy yesterday, and we had a session. Once again, I'm saying I don't do MDMA therapy, but he went and had a session of MDMA therapy, and what he took home from that is really what you said, Meg, is what he got to actually experience firsthand, that sense of safety, love, and connection that he never felt before. And, if many of us, which we often do in recovery, have a difficult childhood, right? A lot of the nurturing, and this isn't for everyone, but I'm kind of generalizing, but for many of us, we've experienced trauma, and to actually have that realization is so profound, and it is a process, and it can be found through all different means. So what Meg and I are sharing with you today, it's like, she's not saying, CBD is the answer, microdosing is the answer, MDMA is the answer. Like, you have to find out what works for you, but be willing to jump in the territory and, see the big picture and take one step forward on your journey. Absolutely.
And I just want to say, I think what we're talking about is so valuable to folks that are sort of the mindset that we're at this stage in our recovery. But I will say, none of this came about, none of these perspectives that I have, or the willingness that I have to I'm not special. I didn't somehow know about all of this stuff. I was just in the dark as anybody else was when all of this psychedelic stuff started to come out. I just started to look back. It really started when I started the work with my therapist, who is a consciousness expert and has studied Jungian psychology, Carl Jung. that's really when I started to recognize that I was operating in the world, just like we all are, on a largely unconscious basis. And that every single time that I engaged in the world from a wounded place, meaning that I was unconsciously bleeding on everybody around me because I had not tended to, nor did I recognize the wounds that were underneath, I was operating from that 4-year-old that just got triggered by the thing that that person said. So now I'm a 4-year-old, 34-year-old, but I'm a 4-year-old from a psyche's development standpoint, operating in the world because the thing that that person just did or said triggered me and put me back into that place. I wouldn't have gotten there if I wasn't willing to accept that trauma is a real thing and looks very different for a lot of people. Sometimes we hear that word and we're like, no, we didn't have trauma. But if you look at from a consciousness perspective and even from a spiritual perspective, we may be holding trauma that has been in existence generational lifetimes before us. I mean, the Hindu belief that a sanskara is what it is because you were born with an imprint of trauma that existed lifetimes before you that you're holding, that actually isn't yours to hold, but it's your job to push through and seek and find relief from and explore and develop awareness around. And that's been super powerful. So I'm not saying that I've gotten here because it was easy or because I just naturally sort of stumbled upon this stuff. I was introduced to consciousness work and I was willing to hear what she had to say about the fact that I was operating in the world unconsciously and that was causing a lot of my suffering. And it wasn't until I had her be able to hold that mirror up to me and reflect back to me that what I just said or what I just did or how I reacted was actually from a wounded place. I would have never been able to seek the truth that I seek now from such an open-minded standpoint because my ego defense would have been up. And so I just encourage people to actually really allow the ego to drop. And however you do that in heart-centering meditation, we call it surrendering the ego. It's incredibly valuable because then you're open to the possibilities. And then you can see that everything serves a purpose and you're no longer the victim. You're not being triggered back to a victim standpoint and then operating in the world as such. That doesn't get us anywhere. That perpetually wounds us for a lifetime. We re-victimize ourselves if we step into that place. So we have to acknowledge that we are wounded and it only makes sense that we're wounded and therefore only makes sense that we're operating in a wounded way. What do we want to do about it?
I couldn't agree with you more. You know, as Carl Jung says, we don't become enlightened by imagining images of light, but by only making the darkness conscious. And many of us don't know that, you know, we're suffering because we're reacting from a wounded child that lives deep within us. And yeah,
it's so powerful.
Yeah. So yeah, you just unpacked so much. For the listeners out there, if they're like, hey, well, how do I discover this part of me, you know, that's wounded and I'm reacting from it? Like, what does that look like? Not to break down a therapy session, but maybe, you know, what are some of the aha moments you've taken in your own, you know, with your own personal experience in regards to living from that wounded child, maybe in relationship or whatever it may be, business. I mean, I know I have a 5-year-old that shows up and he's scared to be seen in the world sometimes. But yet everyone's like, oh yeah, you know, they probably see me through how their lens. Oh, Mike Govoni's doing all this, but yeah, you know, I have to champion this little guy too. So what does that look like for you?
Good question. I think so much of it has come from my awareness around my family dynamics, and that's not to say that I blame anybody for anything. I think when you come from a family system where things are just done a certain way, or there are sort of these unconscious contracts that have existed for generations, you can start to see that you're just sort of a part of the chaos. Like there was nothing special about you in which you received this trauma. It was just kind of, you were part of a system. And so I think so much of my ability to self-heal now has come from, you know, the ways in which I have my therapist reflect back to me these different dynamics that I engage in the world. So you bring up a great example. So relationships is one of them. Another big one for me is my resistance to authority, which is why I'm pursuing sort of my own career path as an entrepreneur and not following the traditional route of a clinical psychologist. and doing the work that I think is necessary in order to help people, and using my skill set in order to do it on the podcast. But so many times I'm in relationship and I'm up against the larger collective that has the capacity to consume me. And so that's how, like, I'm able to see now that I have a fear of an authority perspective not being in a place to be able to make decisions, which absolutely comes from anybody who is listening to this, that comes from a family of addicts, alcoholics, raised by folks that have struggled with addiction, have had this in their family, mental illness and the like. They know what I'm talking about. We know that as children, when you think back to, trauma, and even consciousness work will tell you that, as a child, I adopted the responsibility of being parentified without anybody ever saying it, without ever even knowing it, simply because my dad struggled with addiction. And so even though my behavior didn't show that I sort of like stepped up to the plate to try to save the day as the kid, because I recognized that the adults didn't have control over anything, it did end up manifesting when I became an adult, because now I have issues of control where I feel relief if I know that I'm the one who's controlling the whole situation. So, for example, it's hard for me to work in groups. It's hard for me to go to supervisors and bosses and ask for support, because in my world, it's only safe when I'm the only one handling it, because I can see it through from beginning to end. And that's like, we'd call that person today, a control freak. And I wouldn't proudly own that. I would truthfully own that and say I'm doing a lot of work on that.
I love it. Yeah. I love it.
But it's true. Yeah. So that's where it pops up. And then it'll pop up when I feel inferior and I feel like the people that I'm around don't value what I have to say, or they're going to not like me because I spoke some truth in some way. And that's been a part of the work lately, is like, I have to recognize that I can pack a punch with the things that I say or the opinions that I have. And I have to be willing to accept that actually the way it's supposed to go is that you're not going to be able to please everybody. And it's not about changing your delivery or changing who you are so then you can please everybody. No, it's about recognizing that you can't please everybody. And how are you going to be okay with that? And how can you still hang on to your own value, knowing that maybe that one person actually doesn't value you? Okay, so what does that mean? Sit with that. Let that feeling pass through you in the meditation, and then you'll find some sort of answer. And that's how it manifests now for me. Wow. I love your transparency. I can identify on all those levels. And, instead of seeing it as oppositional defiant disorder, it's like, hey, maybe my family dynamic was full of trauma and I had to really step it up, and I have a little issue with authority or being told what to do because I feel like I need to be in control. And it's like, those patterns all develop unconscious, but like you said, when you can really bring that up above the line of consciousness and actually feel your way through it and let it pass, something else comes through the other side, like a different response. And, it's totally not all about, pleasing everyone, but really owning ourselves. Right. And I think that's a difficult thing, in recovery. You hear people say, people pleaser. Right, all the time. And it's like, well, yeah, we people please because we don't have freaking any boundaries. You know what I mean? And it's just like, when we learn to own ourselves and when we learn to, say no, right? And we learn to, really honor what we need in that moment. Like, yeah, everyone can do their thing too, but we can actually function from our own truth. Absolutely. And that takes a lot of work. It's a ton of work. It's exhausting actually doing the work, but it's more exhausting not, because then you're stuck in a place where you don't even, the world is sort of dragging you around by the nose and you don't even know about it. So it does take a lot of work. But to me at this point, it's really the only option, because like, how else do you live? You know what I mean? My whole thing is like, I'm trying to break through this stuff. I don't want to stay stuck in these patterns. And I recognize that when I'm having those reactions, all of what we just talked about, that is from an ego defense standpoint. That is my ego actually doing its job. Thanks, ego. You showed up. You fucking killed it, man. But guess what? I got it now. I'm going to ask you to surrender, and we're going to move through this with compassion, because I accept you too. I know you have a job here to do. What's up, dude? Like we're partners. Okay, cool. This is about ego development for me as well. It's about having a strong enough ego that you can ask it to surrender, and it actually does. Yeah, totally. Not about cutting it off from yourself, but
allowing it to be part of the system in service for you and your evolution.
Exactly.
It's really deep. Like if you're on the other end of this and you're lost, don't worry about it. We both, had to do a lot of work, research, and discovery to get here. But the most important thing, like you said, Meg, is to do the work, although it's difficult. On the contrary, living unconscious through all these patterns is extremely difficult. And in fact, I think, one of the biggest places where a lot of people suffer in recovery is in relationship, because that little guy or gal is really driving the bus, and they're unable to, surrender to the wounded part of themselves and really, understand that part and hold that part in compassion, but they're trying to keep that defense up all the time. I know for a long time I was, and it was really difficult. So what have you learned about yourself through this whole process, and where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
Good question. What have I learned about myself in the process? Well, I've accepted the idea that as much as people mean well in the world, we all have our wounds. And so I've really tried to focus, like the one thing that I come back to often is like, you can't take things personal. It's not personal. It's not about you. Anytime you're having sort of a reaction to something that's happened in your life, it's because your woundedness got triggered. And guess what? That happens with everybody else too. And so I've learned about myself that there's a potential to unlock here, and this goes for everybody. We all have this. The potential that we have to unlock in ourselves to be able to set ourselves free and live in line with our truth, whatever that truth is. And I don't know if I have found my truth entirely yet, but I know that I'm willing to see it as soon as it pops up. And I like to come back to what Gabor Mate says, which is, animals don't suffer because they live in the present moment. They live their truth. Humans suffer because, we're either worrying about the future or ruminating about the past and have a really hard time staying in the present because we're not aligned with our truth. And it's so simple to say that. And I wish I had an easy answer as to how you can find your truth. It really takes a lot of self-discovery, self-exploration, and openness to be able to look at ourselves with awareness and say, like, yeah, man, I don't like when I do that, or when I react that way, it causes me a lot of distress. And so I've had to recognize that, like, I come with these complexities. When I'm in relationships with people, I come with these complexities. It's the reason why I seek people out that are complex. It's like I get bored when, someone can't match me on an intellectual level. And so that requires some friggin' wild conversations, just like the one that we're having right now. And so I have to accept that, I can't just people please everybody and make everybody happy, because in the meantime, I'm killing myself because I have to shut off a part of myself in order to do that. And so much of this has been acceptance around finding your tribe and speaking your truth in order to weed out the people that aren't meant to be there and bring in the people that are. And that's a scary place to be, because you may be alone for a while before you figure that out. Or you may be alone for a while before you start bringing the people into your network and your circle that align with you on an energetic level, which is sort of where I would hope everybody can land. But, it's hard to do that. And so I think moving forward in my life, it's so important for me to hold true to that and to recognize that this exploration is just going to continue. And guess what? The person that I am today may not be the person that I see myself as, 10 years from now. Like, I'm in the mental health field now. Will I be in the mental health field in 10 years? I have no idea. And I honor the fact that I'm a true blue Gemini and I thrive in change, and that I get bored with things. And once I feel like I have accomplished or conquered that one thing that I was seeking out to do, whatever the intention was, and then, okay, well, now it's time to move on to something else. And so I have recognized and honored myself as a human being with my quirks and my complexities and my inability to fit into a mold or into a system because of whatever, that in order for me to find success, I have to construct a world in which I am honoring my truth. That means not working a 9 to 5. That means not working under the discretion or the direction of somebody else. It means actually running my own show. No pun intended.
Literally. And that's not from an ego place. That's from, I've stepped into my power and I'm willing to accept that that's what I have to offer the world. So let's roll with it and let's see what happens. And let's just move forward. And so
to answer your second question, 5 years from now, or how I see my life in the future, I mean, as long as I feel like I am giving whatever gift that I have come to settle on through the exploration of sifting through all of the pain, suffering, and trauma, if I can give that to somebody, and that gift to me is simply helping them see things from a different perspective and potentially stepping outside the box to see themselves and see themselves in position to the rest of the world, then I have absolutely done my job. However that looks, I don't know. But as long as that is the theme and that is the intention and that is the message behind everything I do, then I'm doing my work. And that's all I can do. And I think, you know, we have platforms like this in which we reach the masses. This is sort of like the macro level. But when we make connections with individual people, and I'll bring it back to sort of how we started this conversation about the person that influenced me to start this podcast. His name was Chris. He passed away on July 24th. It'll be 3 years from a fentanyl overdose. He was in the clinical psychology program with me. He was studying to be a doctor. He was in recovery, and he relapsed and unfortunately passed away. He had a podcast before I had mine, and he coached me on the reasons why this was a good idea. And it was about speaking my truth and the fact that I had a lot to say and that I could do it this way. You know, and I think when in his whole message, he looked at me and said, Meg, I don't know, I think you're fucking crazy. You're talking about all this macro shit about how we're going to change the world from this, you know, big perspective. I'm not really trying to do all that. I'm trying to just have connections with individual people and hope that therefore I create some sort of ripple effect. And you know what? He was 100% right, because we can scream from the rooftops about all the different pathways to recovery and that it should all be validated, and whatever path to healing you have got to find. Power to you, as long as you are committing to a plan, committing to a process, and actually putting in the work. It really shouldn't even matter what path that is. But we create the most change when we have intimate connections with people who can take what we're saying, digest it, and then push it forward. And so that's the biggest impact that I could have. And I have found that through the podcast, not because we have, you know, listeners and all over the country and numbers and blah, blah, blah. No, it's the individual people that have reached out to me to say, wow, I had no idea that you could use amino acids to replace antidepressants. Like, what was that experience like for you? Or I had no idea that CBD and cannabis could do these things. Or, you know, what's that craft model about addiction, which is about engagement, not disengagement with your loved one who's struggling. All of these different ways in which people's lives have actually been impacted from an individual personal connection that has come from this podcast. And so I think it's so powerful to be able to meet people where they're at, human to human, from a compassionate standpoint, and say, you know, I get it. I'm not looking at you like you're crazy. I got no judgment here. You know, I value all of these parts of you, and I want to model that for you as you embark on your journey. And I think that stuff is so powerful. So I just want to leave that too with people of like, as you hear the story, take what you need and leave the rest, right? Same motto as AA. And I'm not even somebody that did AA, but I think that's so powerful. Take what you need, fill yourself with it, get whole and get clear. I mean, self first is not selfish. In fact, it is the only way to engage the world in a healthy and compassionate way to actually mobilize some change. You are the tool. So you need to get clear about yourself, and you need to look really deep. We need to accept that as human beings, we are all incredibly flawed, if you want to say that. We are impacted by the generations of trauma before us. That is not our fault, and it's not our job to carry all of that. What our job is to sift through it to see what lessons we can find in the meantime, so then we can go out and help move that momentum forward, so we can spread this healing to people who genuinely want it, who genuinely need it, and who are willing to do the work. And that's the most powerful thing that this whole journey has taught me, and the capacity to be able to give that.
Beautiful, Meg, beautiful. You're so right about putting yourself first. And you're right, it's not selfish. It's not self-centered. Without you, there's no real change that you can make, right? And it's about really putting yourself first. So I think that was so important, important point that you made. So you're doing amazing work. I'm so glad to know you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to spread all your insight, wisdom, and knowledge with the listeners on the show today.
Thank you, Mike. I so appreciate you. This has been a beautiful conversation, and it's so energizing to be able to connect with people who allow you the opportunities to sort of say your piece in full, and that can accept that. And I think so much of where we're at in society is to cut off the parts of other people and of ourselves that we're afraid of. And I think when we recognize that when we're moving out of fear, we're willing to make the change, we can kind of backtrack a little bit and say, okay, let's figure this out. Because when we operate in a fear-based way, it doesn't get us anywhere. So I appreciate your acceptance of me and your willingness to allow me to share so much of my story on your show. And I'm so happy that you have decided to start your own podcast. This is so badass, Mike.
Yeah, with your help. I remember when I called you and I'm like, hey, Meg, how do I do this? How do I do that? And you guided me. And so I appreciate that. And for the listeners, tell them where they can find you, the podcast, social media.
Absolutely. So we are the Addictionary Podcast, and we are so fortunate to have an amazing producer, Sweets, who is producing our show. He got us up on YouTube, and we have a few months under our belt now of being an actual show on YouTube, which has been incredible. It's actually been a whole new part of the development of the show. And I started the show with my dad, who's in recovery, and he recently stepped down as he's, taking his official retirement now and helping us with some marketing stuff. And now I have a little puppy. Her name is Gaia, and she's my co-host. So you guys can see her every week. And I'm doing a contest where I'm having listeners pick her middle name. So find us on YouTube, find us on Instagram at the Addictionary Podcast. We also have an awesome Facebook group, the Addictionary Podcast Facebook group, where I actually take a lot of the content, and I'm still building it right now, but taking the content that I share on the show and actually putting it into an online hub with the resources that I talk about and the supplements that I have used, which, by the way, I make zero money off of any of this stuff. This is truly because I have lived it and I have experienced the freedom that I have felt, and I'm just giving it as a resource to the people out there. So follow us on social, and you'll be up to speed with all of that.
Awesome, Meg. And thanks again for your open heart, your fierce attitude. I love it. And may you be well.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you. God bless you.
So many amazing takeaways from this show with Meg. I want to thank you for listening to another episode on the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast. And before you head out, I'd like to ask you for one favor. If you found this episode to be helpful and it inspired you in any way, I kindly ask that you leave a review on iTunes. It's super helpful for the show and allows others to see your feedback so they too can check it out. Remember, you can heal no matter what your story may be. Until next time, may you be well.